Hello, friends. I've got a gripping interview for you this episode. My guest Chris Owens chats with me about trying to piece together the hidden life of his brother Robbie. Robbie suddenly died young when Chris was barely a teenager. Years later, he discovered that not only was his brother gay like himself, but that Robbie died from AIDS-related pneumonia. Prepare yourself for an emotional conversation. Welcome to Jackie Just Chatters. By sharing people's stories, I strive to generate laughter, inspiration, maybe help you escape from the stressful world. I am your hostess, Jackie Lentz, who's still figuring out her own story. This podcast comes out every other Thursday. I can be found wherever you get your podcast or on YouTube. I'd be most grateful if you left me some stars or a review, and subscribe if you never want to miss an episode. Thank you for listening and sharing. Welcome back. Sorry this episode is a week later than planned. A battle with bronchitis kind of knocked me flat for a week, and I've been trying to catch up. Thank you to all those who sent kind words and thoughts over at my Facebook page. It's meant a lot. Seriously. Now, on with this interview. Chris Owens, my guest today, grew up in a rural southern town inside a turbulent family. His youth was made more challenging by the struggle to come to terms with being gay and the sudden death of his big brother. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
I'm so excited to have you here. I've really been looking forward to our chat today. Start with telling us a little about yourself.
Sure. So I grew up in a town of about 2,600 people. It's about 70 miles southwest of St. Louis. And it's funny, Missouri is always the state that sometimes tests as Southern when it comes to food and language use and things like that, but is not typically considered like part of the Deep South or anything like that. But it felt very much like a Southern place to grow up when I was growing up, especially now that I look back on it as an adult. But I went to college at Ozark Christian College. I majored in piano at first, and then I ended up with a deaf roommate. I think that was my second year of college. And so I decided to take some sign language classes and ended up becoming an interpreter. And I worked as a professional interpreter till about 2009 when I took a training role in my company and had been worked as a trainer, training development manager. And for the last 14 months or so, I am a product manager at my same company, working on developing some software that our interpreters will use.
It must be so fulfilling to have a job where you know what you do really impacts people's lives. It's not like you're just this pencil pusher. Like, you know what you do directly is helping other people.
It really is. As an interpreter, people ask me sometimes what that's, and I'm like, it's really being present at birth and at death and everything in between, because so much of our lives require the ability to communicate. And that's the primary work of an interpreter, is to facilitate communication. And so we're there at all stages, all the milestones, weddings, graduations, things like that. You just really get to experience a breadth of life that I don't think you get in many other careers like that.
That sounds beautiful. Let's begin with your TikTok video. Listeners, I've put the link in the episode notes. I recommend you pause this podcast, go watch the quick video, and then come back so you know what we're talking about. Chris, tell me about the video, why you made it.
Sure. So the video is very simple. It is some photographs of my brother and sometimes the both of us in the same picture. And it just through captions tells the story of my brother Robbie's life and in a very short amount of time what that entailed. And I picked a song to go behind it and posted it, really just missing him and remembering him. And it was around my birthday, I believe, that I posted that. And I there are people who do really well on TikTok, and that wasn't me. Like most of my videos, I think prior to that might have gotten, I don't know, a couple of hundred views or something like that. And so you can imagine my surprise when my TikTok app just kept blowing up with like notifications of comments and viewers and things like that. And I was really amazed by kind of the just the outpouring of support and the people with whom that story resonated. And it was, yeah, it was really, I didn't intend for it to turn into this video with massive views. But one of the things I have learned about TikTok, though, and a friend of mine is also on TikTok, trauma does really well on TikTok. It's one of those things that for some reason people are very interested in stories of other people's trauma. And maybe it's so that they don't feel so alone in their own trauma. So maybe it serves that purpose. And it could be that they're just morbid and want to eavesdrop on the suffering of others, maybe. But I don't know why, but it did resonate with a lot of people. And that was really the initial reason that I posted it, is just because I was missing Robbie. I do that around my birthday and around his birthday, which is only about 3 weeks apart. And so it's at those times that I will think about him a lot and miss him. And that was the impetus of posting the video.
The music you chose, that just, it was haunting. Like it really, when I watched it, I just got chills watching. You're right. It's so simplistic and yet it's not. It's like visual poetry. It's so moving. And it is interesting of how the trauma does well. I think you're right. I think probably most people, it makes them feel better to know that they're not the only ones suffering. And it doesn't matter if it's the exact same trauma. It's just, hey, I hurt, somebody else hurts. I'm not hurting alone. And I have found that when people have gone through something horrible and they've gone through that grief, especially if they've lost someone, that grief is so intense and it changes you. I think it makes most people much more compassionate. And when they see that grief in someone else, they're like, I feel you, I understand you. And it does make them feel better about, I'm not alone. And it's okay that my grief didn't go away in the appropriate 3 months or whatever the appropriate time is, because it doesn't work like that. Grief, it's got its own ride.
Yeah, it's not linear at all.
No, not at all. Okay, so I'd like to go back to the beginning of the story. And could you share what happened when your brother Robbie came out to your father?
Sure. To I'm going to back up a little bit to give some kind of context into my family. Both of my parents have been married 4 times, and I have three half brothers and three half sisters. I don't have any full siblings. And my brother Robbie is my dad's oldest child. And it was because our dad and his mom were divorced. He didn't live with us when I was growing up. He would visit occasionally, typically holidays and during the summer and on birthdays, things like that. That's one of the few perks of coming from a divorced family like that is you get two birthday parties and you get two Christmases and things like that. Sometimes you got to look for the silver lining where you can find it. But so this would have been a Christmas when Robbie was spending Christmas Eve with us. This was on Christmas Eve. And don't ask me why we're so bad about coming out on holidays like that. Like that's just never a good idea. And but it does seem to be a pretty common, I think, theme with people I've talked to that the coming out process is often when you're with your family, and oftentimes that's at a holiday gathering.
That makes
But it,
sense.
but I was young when this happened, and I'm trying to remember the specific year. That's my frustrations throughout this process that I'm going to talk about is not having a whole lot of very clear, distinct memories and knowing the exact time that they occurred. But I would say I was probably probably six, I think, which means Robbie would have been about 18 or 19 at the time.
Okay.
And the rest of the family had been home and cooking and wrapping presents and listening to music. And my dad and Robbie had been at the Elks Club. I don't know if your listeners are familiar with the Elks Club. It's a kind of a fraternal club that
Like
sometimes
the
they'll
Eagles and
yes, all of that. And so
yes.
play essentially I always look at them as like member only bars because that's how I experience them. Even though there are like
Yeah.
things that they do and toy drives and there are other parts to them, but I
Right.
experienced the bar part pretty much. And so they'd been up at the Elks Club and then they came home and we had a Jeep at the time. And so I heard the Jeep pull up and went to the back window to watch for them to come in, and they didn't come in right away, which was unusual. You park and you get out and you go inside. And so I was waiting for them to get out of the Jeep, and they finally did. So I was really excited. I ran in the other room and, told everybody that they were coming in. And I was so excited because in my family, we got to open one present on Christmas Eve. I had been fixated on those presents all day and trying to figure out which one I wanted to open. And being a kid, that's what Christmas is about. And so we couldn't start that until everybody was in. And so that's why I was so anxious. And so they came in and Robbie came into the living room with us. And my dad stayed in the kitchen, sat down at the table, didn't take his coat off, and was really quiet. And he was staring at Robbie the whole time. And so even I'm a child drunk on Christmas fever and ready to open a present. I could tell something was off. And shortly after that, my dad got up and launched himself at Robbie, and they got into a physical fight. And that's pretty much all I remember of that because I believe my sister and her boyfriend whisked me away so that I wouldn't be there for that. I think they took me to my aunt and uncle's house. And that was really the last time that I can remember Robbie coming to that house that I lived in. And when I was 10, actually 11, I believe, my mom and I moved out of that house when my dad and my mom split up. I don't remember him ever coming back to that house, but he and my dad were estranged until shortly before his death. I would say within the last year of his death, they had Robbie and his friend, I thought at the time, came down for Christmas one year. And then we went up there at some point to visit them. And it was like my stepmom and my dad and me and the adults were in the other room talking. I was keeping myself occupied in the living room on the television, and I would have been probably 13 at that point, I think. But again, I don't remember. No, I remember that happening. I don't have a lot of like even just memories of what he looked like at the time and things like that. It's like I said, that's been a frustrating part of this is to not be able to remember a lot of things more clearly.
Memories, they fade, especially if you had known what was coming, would have remembered. It would have been so emotional, so traumatic at that time, you would have remembered.
Yes. That's one
But
of the things I have a list of things to correct when I figure out the time machine thing. And that's one of them because you don't know what's coming most of the time. It doesn't seem important when it happens. And it's only later when something happens and you realize how important that was in hindsight. You spend a lot of time, I think, feeling guilty over things that you really can't even control. There's no way that I could have known.
well, and you were a kid. It takes a long time to get over ourselves. It is not, oh, those kids and they're this or that child is selfish. It's just normal when you were young to be focused on yourself and to learn things in your world. And that's normal. Your perspective is very small. It's only as you get older and your perspective gets bigger and bigger. Most children do not start looking at their parents as a human being, as an adult, until they leave the house and start having their own house to clean. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, the cup doesn't magically go into the dishwasher. I have to do it. It seemed to magically do it at home. Oh, okay. No, it wasn't a magic thing. Somebody else did that for me. Okay. I can see why I was a turd back then.
Yes, hindsight, I don't know. Everything in my mom's purse was for me. And so any candy bar I might find was mine. And she
Yep.
had brought it for me. And then later you're like, oh, yeah, no, that probably wasn't the case.
When did you understand and accept that you were gay?
So this is always an interesting question to answer because I think as a pretty young kid, I think I always realized that I was different than the other boys in my neighborhood and different than some of my brothers. And so it's a matter of having the vocabulary for what it is that you're feeling and noticing. And so I think on some level I'd always known, but I think it was probably in my early teenage years where I really understood the attraction that I was feeling to other boys my age and Magnum PI and
Oh,
like
who
all of that,
didn't have something
all
for Magnum PI?
right.
Oh, those
Um,
shorts.
yes, I do hope those short shorts make a reappearance in our culture here in the
Oh, day.
2020s.
Any day they can come back. Whew.
I think I always knew, just even watching television and feeling an attraction toward actors versus actresses and things like that. I don't know that I ever really I still had girlfriends even in high school. And I think that is also a part of growing up as a gay person is you create a self that is acceptable to your family and friends and your church. And so I view it as playing a role in which is necessary sometimes for safety and having a home. There's so many homeless gay youth whose families aren't as accepting. And so you create a role that you play yourself. And then when that role isn't necessary for survival, then you start to discover really who you are outside of that role. And I think in many ways, my even just dating skills I felt were stunted in effect because for straight people, they get to date and have romantic relationships in their teens and their 20s. And then that leads to maybe something longer term marriage or we're living together. And so there are these years of practice that straight people have with these adult roles that when I was in a position to where I could start dating men, I didn't have the practice that everybody else had. And dating in the gay community is quite a bit different than dating in the straight community, or at least back in the day, it was having to be more cautious and using coded language or whatever. So, yeah, so I think I'd always known on some level. And then in my early teens, I think I figured out what it was. And it was terrifying, honestly. I think most of us are terrified of that part of ourselves because we don't understand it. At the time, it wasn't really portrayed in media and nobody talks about it. So it was one of those things that you just, suffer in silence until you can come to terms with it.
When did you find out that Robbie was gay?
So I think that the first time that I knew would probably have been talking to my dad. My dad had a lot of guilt over how he responded to Robbie's coming out and their estrangement until shortly before he died. My dad is an alcoholic, and guilt combined with alcohol sometimes leads to those late night confessions through tears about what really happened and things like that. And so I just remember my dad telling me that during one of those times when he was feeling really guilty and sad about what happened. And it was just him and I in there. And it's one of those, it's not comfortable to watch your dad completely break down and just racking sobs. And I didn't have the ability to respond with empathy. It was just awkward silence and trying to comfort the best that I could as maybe a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old. I can't remember exactly when that happened, but it was my dad that had told me that he was gay. And I don't remember if I had suspected that at all up until that point. And it wasn't something I thought about when he did come around or when we went up there. It wasn't something that I put together, I don't think.
So when you did finally learn, and at that point you knew that you were gay as well, how did that connection impact you? What were you thinking when you were like, oh my gosh, my brother was gay and I'm gay? This whole time you didn't know that there was somebody in your family who had gone through the same struggles you'd gone through.
It was, I think I wasn't old enough to really understand um, what having a gay brother might have meant for me had he lived. And to be clear, if you haven't watched the TikTok video, he died from AIDS in 1987, October. And so when knowing that I was gay and that Robbie was gay, and that was how he died, I became pretty terrified of what it meant to be gay because it was the mid to late 80s and nobody was talking about it. The administration at the time wasn't doing anything. And so I was pretty terrified, but I was way too young to be sexually active at that time, or at least in my mind. And I had started going to church and was pretty involved in my church youth group, and I had a girlfriend and things like that. So all of any type of reflection on what that would have meant to have a gay older brother in my family and know that I was gay didn't really happen for a few years. I would say when I first really started to understand what I had actually lost when Robbie died was when I think it was 1999 and I was going to turn 25, which is the age that he was when he died. And so
Mm,
it hit me that I had reached as old as he ever would be. Like he's always going to be 25. And
right.
so to and look at my life and realize I had it pretty good. I had a great set of friends. I had a good job. And I just started coming out and going to gay bars and things like that. And so I just realized that anything that came after that point is something that Robbie would never have gotten to do. And that started to weigh on my mind and realizing how such an important role that my sort of chosen family had begun to play in my life. So the friends that I was coworkers with, my gay friends and things like that, most of us form a chosen family or a logical family.
Right.
Realizing how important it was to me, that's the age where I became more and more important for me to know that Robbie got to experience what I was experiencing. So that was the impetus for this search that I've been on to try to find people who knew Robbie outside of my family because my family never talked about him. And it was just one of those things. I became obsessed with finding people who knew Robbie and remembered him outside of my family.
That makes a lot of sense that when you hit that age and you moved beyond, that's one of those things that's going to hit home. So you're thinking about him, you're wanting to know what his life was like when he left home. How do you go about that? What was that journey like? And what did you learn?
It's been a fascinating journey because in the beginning, so in 1999, the internet was still pretty new at the time. And I'll
Yeah.
go back to when I was a teenager. One evening, I was at my dad's house and I was sleeping in the guest room, which is where there was a desk and some filing cabinets and stuff. And I am nosy. It's always been one of those things. If I visit your house, I'm gonna look in your medicine cabinet. That's just a given. I'm just nosy.
I've been
I've always
warned.
been that way. Yes, you've been warned. Uh,
I will make sure
so
to clean
it's
my medicine cabinet if you're coming over.
yeah, it's one of those things that I don't know why I'm just obsessed. But I was snooping around my dad's files and I found a folder that had Robbie's name on it. And inside was his death certificate and some financial papers and things. And so when I looked at his death certificate, I saw that the cause of death was pneumonia. So the PCP pneumonia that is pretty common when people have their immune system compromised. And it listed it as a complication of acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, so AIDS. And so also on the death certificate was a name of Robbie's partner at the time. And so I I don't know, that name just always stuck in my head. Like I can still see it, like, how it was printed on the death certificate. And so I figured that was Robbie's friend that had come up a couple times, and we'd gone to their house in St. Louis once. And so I sort of mentally filed that away. And then in 1999, I had, I think, my first personal computer and internet access, and I had started searching for his partner. His name is Larry. I started looking for Larry online. I found a phone number listed for an attorney's office where he worked. And I wrote that down on a piece of paper and stuck it in my wallet, and didn't feel like I was ready to make that phone call yet. And one day when I was on a lunch break, I decided I was going to call. And I called and asked to speak to Larry. And the person who answered the phone was like, hang on a second. And so I was placed on hold and then transferred, and a woman's voice picked up. And she was like, can I help you? And I'm like, yeah, I'm trying to reach Larry. And she was like, sorry to have to tell you this, but he passed away some weeks ago.
Oh,
And so I had missed that by not very much time. It was close enough to where I was kicking myself for not having tried to do that earlier. And she did say that she had gone to Larry's funeral and met some people, and she would try to reach out to them to see if anybody knew Robbie and remembered him and could maybe get in touch with me. And so I waited. She called me, I think, a couple weeks later and said, I haven't heard back from anybody. And that was it. I was crestfallen, is a good way to put that. I was really disappointed that I hadn't been able to find him and reach out in time. And from 1999 until about 2012, and 2012 would have been Robbie's 50th birthday. So it's those types of milestones where I think it like hits me a little bit more. And by that time, I had also started to think about how different it might have been to navigate my family if I had a gay older brother who was still here. And as much as I love my other siblings, there's always a part of me that they won't really ever get. And so I was missing that, what could have been the type of relationship that he and I could have had as adults. I started to really begin to mourn that. And that was the surprising part of this grief journey, is that it didn't ever become less. I missed him more as time went on. And I'd never experienced that with any other type of grief, and I still haven't. And so it's those types of thoughts and taking some time to indulge a fantasy of what it might have been like if he were still alive that really pushed me into trying to find more people. So in 2012, I did find Larry's obituary and saw the names of his sisters listed and their married names. And so then I started searching for them. And I did find a sister, and I went into one of the vacant offices at work and made the call and asked if she had remembered my brother. And she did, but didn't want to talk to me because in her mind, it was Robbie's fault that Larry died.
oh.
And so she was very unsympathetic to my cause. And that was probably a 37-second conversation. Like it didn't yield what I wanted.
So that's your second crush, just falling. You get this almost, and then you were too late. Then you find this other link, and then they don't want to have anything to say. Oh my, that's horrible. Where'd you go
Yes.
next?
I actually took to Craigslist and posted in the Men Seeking Men personal section a picture of Robbie. And Robbie was in St. Louis at this time. His partner was Larry. Does anybody remember him or them? And that was probably my most desperate act, I think,
It's a
because,
Hail Mary.
people don't go to the Men Seeking Men classifieds looking for that type of post. And then, but oddly enough, I did hear from a couple of people who really just remembered him from seeing him out socially, and not knowing these people from Adam. I wanted to verify that it was actually Robbie that they remembered. And there was one guy that I spoke to through email, and he was like, yeah, Robbie frosted his hair once and stuff like that. And I like remember that. And it's frosted in pictures that I have of him. And so so there were people that remembered him, but only casually, just seeing out.
None of his found family that you were really looking for.
Right. It's placated me for a bit. Like I was like, okay, I found something at least, and I hadn't really expected to. And so that was something to hold on to as time moved on. And then during COVID, posted a Facebook message in I think it's a St. Louis gay history group on Facebook. And a guy named Stuart, who he curates the AIDS Memorial Instagram and Facebook accounts. And so it is essentially just he posts pictures of people that have been lost to HIV and AIDS, and somebody will write a memorial post for them and post pictures. And it's the goal is to just remember the names, remember the people, remember their life. And so he had reached out and he's like, hey, would you like to do a post on your brother on the AIDS memorial? And I'm like, sure. So I picked some photos and wrote up the text for that. And this was the first time that I saw such a massive outpouring for somebody that people didn't really know. I was looking at the number of comments that were coming in and the likes and things like that. And if social media likes anything more than trauma, it's a pretty face. And my brother was gorgeous.
Oh, he was a cutie pie.
He was just handsome. There's no other way to put it. And so I think that coupled with the sadness of his story just brings people out and they want to comment or respond in some way. And so I combed those comments daily for a while, looking for somebody who might say, oh, I remember him or something like that. So did that in 2020, and I did hear from somebody so Rob was a performer at Union Station in St. Louis for a while. It was an entertainment company that provided entertainment at the Union Station venue in St. Louis. And so he had a picture of like a cast photo. It was him with the other castmates and crew. He had sent me that picture. I had never seen that before. And then so that was really all I got out of that initial post on the AIDS Memorial in 2020. In 2022, that would have been Rob's 60th birthday. And I asked Stuart if I could post something again for what would have been his 60th birthday. And I did. And in that post, I shared about my experience of trying to find people who knew him and things like that. And again, combing through all the comments and checking my filtered messages in case somebody had tried to reach out. And I ended up hearing from somebody who lives in Greece, but who used to live in Chicago, and he was roommates with Robbie for several months. I guess Robbie was dating I want to say he told me that it was a linguistics teacher, maybe, I think. And in Chicago, because he went to Chicago for a bit, I guess they had an argument and Robbie got thrown out. And this guy had witnessed that and told Robbie that he could stay with him in his place. And they were roommates for a bit. And then one day Robbie was like, I think I'm ready to head back out on my own. Thank you so much. And that was really the last time they talked. And he didn't ever really know what happened to Robbie until he saw the post on the AIDS Memorial. So he was able to send me a picture that I hadn't seen before. It was of the two of them sitting on the lion or by the lion at the Chicago Art Institute.
Yeah.
So he sent me, people are so kind. He sent me internationally a physical photograph that he had. He still had the negatives. He had it printed and sent me a photo from Greece, which I was really appreciative of. And that was one. And then I got another message from someone who had been a neighbor of Rob and Larry when they lived in St. Louis and remembered him. And I spoke with him on the phone and we talked for a lot. And he told me what he remembered of Robbie, which was just more than I ever expected to get. And then he also gave me the name of who he considered to be Rob's best friend. And her name is Susan. I had reached out to Susan and in an email, and I put my brother's name in the subject line. She wouldn't miss it. And we were on the phone within an hour, probably. And she told me, she's believe it or don't, but I've been thinking about him a lot lately. And maybe it's because he would have been 60 or whatever. She wasn't surprised to hear from me, I don't think. Just having a feeling that thinking about him and he was just in her headspace when I had reached out. And so she was able to tell me a lot of stories, and she sent me photographs via text that I hadn't seen before of her and Robbie. And they performed in a college production of cabaret. She had some pictures from that, and I had some news clippings. My mom always saved pictures. That's one of the things I appreciate about my mom. We had Polaroids back then, so that had the white chin on the bottom of the photo, and my mom always wrote the name and the year in like Christmas or Easter or whatever. So I always had that. And then even in the newspaper clippings that she would have cut out about Robbie, she would write the year if it wasn't already on there and things like that. She was really good about documenting stuff like that. I got pictures that I hadn't really seen and got to talk to somebody who remembered him. The guy who is the neighbor in St. Louis, he actually is in Salt Lake City, which is where my company is headquartered. And when I switched positions and went to Salt Lake City in June, he and I got to have coffee and meet face to face and realized would never have been in the same room since Robbie's funeral. He went to Robbie's funeral in my hometown. He brought some things that he had with him. Actually, a picture of Robbie at Larry's family's house one year for Christmas. And so I got picture. He gave me a couple of pictures of Larry. He thinks they've got some things in storage at his house, actually. And so he's going to check next time he's back home to see if he has anything else. But he was very generous. And he asked me, I also know some things that you might not want to know about. And I told him, I'm like, I want to know everything. I don't want to have a romanticized idea of what he was. I really just wanted to know who he was, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And there's ugly, and that's okay because I have ugly. We all have ugly parts of our lives.
Right.
And I don't judge him retroactively or anything like that. I think we all just do the best that we can at the time with what we have. And I have ended up hearing from more people than I ever thought I would hear from. I actually going home for a family wedding in October. One of the things the guy who was the neighbor, let's just call him John for the sake of conversation. One of the things that he gave me was a picture of Rob when he was performing at a wedding, and it was about a month before he died. The photographer included a little note in a business card saying, "Hey, I saw Robbie at the wedding," and this was all addressed to Larry at the time. He mentioned how happy he was and just this kind of nice letter to go with the picture. I've been able to get in touch with that photographer. We talked on the phone a couple of weeks ago. We're going to meet for coffee. I'm going home for a family wedding in October. So on our way out of town, we're going to stop in St. Louis and have coffee with
Lovely.
her. She was another one of Rob's friends when he, lived in our little hometowns. I'm finding more and more people who remember him and are just incredibly generous with sharing what they remember.
What would you say is the most interesting thing that you've learned about your brother since you began this journey?
I guess probably it'll be interesting but also sad. So just prepare yourself.
Okay.
Rob and Larry had gone on a gay cruise at some point and had the best time. And when Robbie knew that he was dying, he wanted to be cremated and have his ashes spread at sea, is what he wanted. And in talking with Susan, she told me that those plans had been shared with my family. And Robbie's funeral and interment is at a Catholic cemetery just outside of my town. I found it interesting that he wanted to be cremated, and it makes me sad that he tried so hard to escape our small town and do something bigger and follow his passion. And in the end, he was brought back. And I feel like he's just imprisoned in a religious institution that reviled him. It's interesting, but it's also sad that my family didn't honor his wishes when they knew them.
That is sad. You've begun writing about your experiences. Tell me about that.
I have my childhood, I'll just say my childhood was fairly traumatic and unstable. And in conversations with just friends over the years, if I mention anything about that, they just look at me incredulous and are like, you should really write a book. I've been told that for a really long time and have always considered that in the back of my mind. I've always enjoyed writing. I have a friend that I went to high school with, and he is a ghostwriter. I had decided that I was going to try to write about this journey, and So I sent him some samples of things, and he was like, I really think that you should pursue this. And I've got a really short list of people that I'm willing to help pro bono, and you're on that list. So anytime you want to try to work on this, please do. I did start writing sort of a manuscript of a memoir about my life and how it has intertwined with Robbie's, and how this need to know what his life was like shaped my life over the course of the years. And I've started writing. Medium.com is a kind of a writer's platform that I've been using. And so I've written some essays there about my experiences. And that's where my current outlet is. I did start a more focused memoir on just the parallels of my life and Robbie's life and that search to find him. I'm about 3 chapters in right now. And so I need to start the 4th chapter here pretty soon. But I have been writing it. I enjoy writing. It's very cathartic. It helps me actually remember things that I didn't necessarily think that I would remember. And so as I've been
Excellent.
writing about periods of my life in high school and college and things like that, the writing process has caused me to remember things that wouldn't maybe not have remembered otherwise.
For the listeners, I will be sharing all of Chris's links and contact information in the episode notes if you want to check that out. It sounds like your story's still ongoing. I look forward to hearing from you about where you're going with your future publishing, and when the book's ready, let me know and I will mention that on the show here.
I would like to just put a bow on the end of my coming out story, just because over the course of talking about this with anybody, people are always keenly interested in asking about how my family reacted when I did come out, given that Robbie had such a terrible experience. And I came out to my mom's part of the family in 1998, and they were literally just waiting for me to come out. My sister, for some time, had been closing all of our phone calls with, you know, I love you, and there's nothing that you could say or do that would ever make me love you any less. And so she's been begging for me to come out. Yes, very cryptic. She's so subtle. And so that felt safe to me. And then it was like just the telephone game. It was my sister, and then my mom, and then my brother on my mom's side, and then my stepdad. All of that happened over the course of one evening in 1998. And then I didn't tell my dad until it was probably 2000, maybe 2001. I think it was probably 2000, over the phone. And he was quiet, and I wasn't really sure how he was going to react, but anybody that I've been dating has always been welcome. He loves me. My current partner, Dan, we've been together for 13 years. He always asks about him, enjoys having us both down for visits and things like that. My coming out experience was so much better than Robbie's, and I feel like that was Robbie's gift to me, because he did it first and it was terrible. And when it was my turn to do it, my dad had learned from all of the mistakes that he had made. And so he didn't make those same mistakes with me. I would say probably that's been the greatest gift of my relationship with Robbie.
That is one hell of a gift and a legacy for him to leave you. That's special, that you can have a relationship with your dad.
It's been interesting to see the kind of turnaround. I would say a few years ago, Dan and I were home, and there's a trans woman in my community who plays country music and performs at venues and things. And Dan and me and my dad went to see her perform at a restaurant in town that has a bar and outdoor seating area. My dad loved it. He knew that she was trans. He made requests. He gave her a big hug after the set. To see that, I think, was kind of a reminder to not underestimate someone's ability to grow.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a lot of growth. That heart had bloomed. That's beautiful. Chris, I want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story with me. I'm honored to hear it. It's a tale.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. This is the first time I've done anything like this. I'm happy to share it. I feel like had Robbie lived, he would have been famous on Broadway or a movie star, because he had the looks and the talent to really do anything that he wanted. If I can share him with as many people as possible, and I guess in my mind, it helps me think that maybe I'm helping him fulfill his dreams, if not the way that being originally intended.
It's important for us to remember our loved ones and know that they're not gone. And you're doing a wonderful thing by helping people learn about Robbie and remember Robbie. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
I had so many feelings and thoughts from this chat. If you do as well, head on over to my new website. That is www.jacquilents.com and share them in the comments section on this episode's link. Remember to be respectful. Please and thank you. I appreciate you listening today. I love that you carved out a little time for me. A shout out to my fans in Kingston, Jamaica. Glad to have you join me here at Jackie Just Chatters. Take care, my friends. Until next time, I wish you well.